Before we begin this story, please make sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another adventure. Every story we tell is crafted to take you away from your world and into another, where anything is possible. Now, let's begin. The night was heavy with fog, the kind that muffles footsteps and swallows entire streets. Daniel stood at the nearly empty platform, clutching his worn leather satchel, wondering again why he had decided to take this late-night train. He muttered to himself, "No one takes the midnight line anymore." But still, there it was, a single glowing lantern, swaying slightly above the platform, and the distant sound of wheels clattering against steel. The train was coming. A voice behind him startled him. "You're early," said an old man leaning on a cane, his coat far too large for his thin frame. His eyes glistened under the dim light. Daniel turned. "Do I know you?" The man shook his head slowly. "No, few do. But you're going where the others can't. You have a ticket, don't you?" Daniel frowned and slid a folded slip of paper from his pocket. It was unlike any train ticket he'd seen, dark blue, with faint silver letters that seemed to move when he tilted it. One passage. Destination, the city beyond. "Got it in the mail," Daniel admitted. "No return address." The old man gave a knowing smile. "Then it's meant for you. Don't waste it." Before Daniel could reply, the shriek of the train's whistle echoed through the night. Out of the fog rolled a massive black engine, its brass fittings gleaming even in the gloom. It slowed with a hiss of steam, and the doors opened silently. "Board quickly," the old man said, tapping his cane. "And remember, not everything you see should be trusted." Daniel stepped on. Inside, the train was nothing like he expected. Rich velvet seats lined the cabin, with lamps casting a golden glow. There were few passengers. A woman in a feathered hat, a young boy staring intently at a chessboard, and a man in a sharp suit reading a newspaper in a language Daniel didn't recognize. Daniel hesitated before sitting near the window. The train lurched forward, and he watched the fog outside give way to pitch-black tunnels. "First time?" the woman in the feathered hat asked. Daniel nodded cautiously. "Yes, I don't even know where this is going." She chuckled softly. "That's the point. The city chooses its visitors. It only reveals itself when it wishes. And once you've been, nothing is ever the same again." Daniel leaned closer. "What city?" The woman gave him a sly look, lowering her voice. "The hidden one, the one between worlds. The one where the streets shift and the towers breathe. You'll see soon enough." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. "You sound like you've been there before." Her eyes flickered toward the boy at the chessboard. "Oh, I've been. Many of us have. Some never come back." The train rattled on, faster than seemed possible. Outside the windows, shadows flickered. Not trees or buildings, but strange shapes that seemed to move in patterns, like living smoke. Daniel whispered, "Where are we?" The boy spoke without looking up from his game. "Between here and there. The tracks don't follow the earth anymore. We're in the Vale." Daniel blinked. "The Vale." The boy finally raised his head. His eyes were startlingly bright, almost glowing. "Don't worry. If you make it through, you'll see beauty beyond imagining. But you'll also see truth. And truth isn't always kind." Hours seemed to blur together, though Daniel couldn't tell if time was moving faster or slower. He dozed, then awoke to the sound of voices raised at the far end of the cabin. The man in the sharp suit had stood, pointing at another passenger who had boarded unnoticed. This newcomer was dressed in rags, his face shadowed by a hood. "You don't belong here," the suited man hissed. "You didn't have a ticket, did you?" The hooded man laughed, a low, unsettling sound. "Tickets are for those who ask permission. I go where I please." The lamps flickered violently. Daniel's heart pounded. The woman in the feathered hat whispered, "Don't look him in the eyes." But Daniel did, just for a second, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Eyes that weren't human, eyes that shimmered with something ancient and hungry. The train screeched as though hitting an invisible barrier. Passengers cried out. The hooded man vanished in a blur of smoke, leaving only the faint smell of ash. The boy slammed his chessboard shut. He'll cause trouble later. He always does. Daniel grabbed the edge of his seat, breathless. What was that? An uninvited, the woman murmured. Every journey has one. Pray he doesn't find you again. The train slowed. A faint golden glow seeped through the windows. Daniel pressed his face to the glass and gasped. In the distance rose spires of crystal, streets lined with glowing lanterns, rivers of light instead of water. The city stretched on forever, suspended between sky and stars, impossibly vast and dazzling. That, the boy said quietly, is the city beyond. The woman added, and it's waiting for you. Daniel's chest tightened with a mix of awe and dread. He knew, deep down, that his life was about to change forever. The train hissed to a stop. The doors opened, and the city called. The train surged onward into the night, and James could no longer tell how long he had been aboard. The rhythm of the wheels was hypnotic, like a heartbeat echoing through time itself. What had begun as an ordinary journey had already twisted into something extraordinary. The fellow passengers, if they could even be called that, seemed less like travelers and more like echoes of another realm. Directly across from him, a woman in a gown stitched from threads of starlight gazed out the window, her lips moving silently as though reciting incantations. 2 rows down, a boy no older than 12 clutched a massive leather-bound tome, its surface alive with faintly glowing runes that shifted and rearranged themselves like living things. The boy's eyes burned faintly amber, catching the dim light with unnatural intensity. And further down still, a man in a tall black hat polished an antique pocket watch, but instead of hands, its face displayed shifting constellations, the stars moving in real time. James felt like an intruder. He was just a man who had wandered into a forgotten station and bought a one-way ticket. Yet now he sat among beings who seemed to belong to another order of existence. He forced his gaze back to the window. Outside, the world was no longer the countryside he had left behind. Instead, they passed through landscapes that shifted like dreams. He saw forests of crystalline trees, their branches bending under the weight of glowing fruit. He saw oceans where colossal leviathans swam through glass-like waters, their glowing eyes fixed on the passing train. He even caught a glimpse of a mountain range where castles floated above the peaks, tethered to the earth below by nothing but chains of lightning. James pressed his hand to the window. The glass hummed faintly beneath his palm, as if the barrier between him and those visions was thinner than it ought to be. Then came the tunnel. The train plunged into blackness so absolute it felt alive. The clatter of the wheels dulled to silence. The chatter of passengers evaporated. The lamps above flickered once, twice, and then dimmed, leaving James in an eerie twilight. But it wasn't quiet. Not really. In that thick black silence, James sensed something vast and watchful pressing in around them. It wasn't sound he felt, but presence. A consciousness, old and immense, as though the tunnel itself had eyes. And in that darkness, the windows betrayed them. They no longer reflected the inside of the train, but showed visions, strange, fleeting glimpses of worlds James couldn't comprehend. One window showed a city upside down, its towers pointing toward a groundless void. Another showed a silver river flowing through a desert of bone. Another revealed a storm of faces, countless, whispering in unison. James flinched and looked away, but curiosity gnawed at him. He couldn't help but steal glances, each vision stranger than the last. It was as though the tunnel peeled back the veil of reality, showing fragments of things that weren't meant to be seen. When the train finally burst out of that suffocating black, James nearly cried out in relief. But then his breath was stolen by what he saw. The city lay ahead. Its skyline shimmered with impossible colors, towers twisting like frozen lightning, bridges arcing across canals that glowed with liquid fire. The air itself seemed alive, vibrating faintly with an unseen energy. Creatures with wings of smoke and eyes like moons drifted lazily between buildings, unconcerned by the train below. Above it all, suspended high in the heavens, was a palace of shifting glass, as though the sky itself had bent into architecture. The conductor's voice carried calmly through the car. "Welcome, passengers, to Arindril, the city between worlds." James's stomach lurched. He had heard the name before, long ago, whispered in bedtime stories his grandmother used to tell him. A-M-Y-T-H, a fairy tale. Yet here it was alive, immense, undeniable. The train slid into a station carved entirely of crystal. Doors opened with a hiss, releasing a wave of perfumed air rich with spices and flowers James didn't recognize. Passengers rose from their seats and filed out as if they belonged, their movements smooth, assured, practiced. Each seemed to know exactly where they were going, as though they had been summoned here with purpose. James remained seated, paralyzed. He had no purpose. He was not chosen. He had simply stumbled onto this train like a fool. A sharp voice broke his trance. First time, James looked up. The man with the pocket watch stood beside him, top hat casting his face in shadow. The constellation watch in his hand gleamed faintly, stars shifting across its face. "Yes," James admitted, his voice hoarse. I don't even know why I'm here." The man smiled, and the smile was anything but kind. "You're here because the city called you. That's how it works. No one comes by accident. And once it calls," he snapped his fingers. The stars above the station flickered in response. "There is no going back." A chill rushed through James. He staggered to his feet, nearly tripping over his bag, and stumbled onto the platform. The train's door sealed behind him with a finality that struck him like a verdict. The city stretched before him, alive and impossible. Lanterns floated on invisible currents, glowing with imprisoned fireflies the size of fists. Vendors in silk robes hawked bottles of living light, their stalls overflowing with strange goods that hissed, sparked, or pulsed like beating hearts. Down one avenue, music swelled, not from instruments, but from the buildings themselves, their walls humming like living voices. James staggered forward, overwhelmed, his senses drowning in color, sound, and scent. Every corner, every shadow seemed alive with possibility. Then he froze. From the crowd ahead, he saw a figure moving with deliberate grace. His chest tightened. It was impossible. The woman's face was unmistakable, though he hadn't seen it in years. His grandmother. She looked exactly as she had before her passing, silver hair pinned neatly, eyes bright with warmth. She moved through the crowd without looking back, slipping into a narrow alley shimmering with faint, unnatural light. James's heart thundered. His grandmother had told him the stories of this city. She had planted the seeds of this impossible journey in his childhood. And now here she was. He called her name, his voice cracking, but she didn't respond. Desperate, James plunged after her, shoving through the press of bodies. The alley was colder, the air heavy with the scent of iron and ozone. The walls themselves seemed to ripple like water, bending around him as though the city was alive and shifting. James stumbled deeper, his pulse wild, until the noise of the marketplace faded behind him. Here, the city was quieter, darker. Lanterns dimmed to faint glows, casting long shadows that writhed unnaturally. At the far end, his grandmother paused, half-turned toward him. Her expression was unreadable. Then, without a word, she stepped through an archway carved into the stone. The archway pulsed faintly with light, a door to somewhere else entirely. James stopped dead. His instinct screamed that this was no ordinary door. To follow would be to leave behind not just the marketplace, not just the city, but perhaps the very world itself. Yet if he turned back, he might never see her again. His decision here would change everything. And in that moment, James realized something chilling. His grandmother wasn't simply part of this city. She belonged to it. And if that was true, then maybe James did too. James stood frozen at the mouth of the glowing archway, heart hammering like a war drum. His grandmother had disappeared through it only seconds ago, her silhouette swallowed by the pulsing light. He knew this was no ordinary doorway. It was a threshold, a passage to something beyond even the impossible city around him. The alley seemed to breathe, the stones underfoot alive with subtle vibrations, as though urging him forward. James's throat tightened. His grandmother had always been the one who told him stories of faraway worlds and hidden wonders, her voice rich with secrets. She had died years ago, yet here she was alive, moving through this city as if she belonged to it. He stepped forward. The air thickened, humming like a struck chord. One step, two steps, and then he crossed the threshold. At once, the world exploded in color. He stumbled into a vast chamber beneath a sky that wasn't a sky at all, but an endless dome of shifting constellations. Thousands of stars burned above him, rearranging themselves into patterns and runes that pulsed with strange intelligence. Floating platforms of stone hovered across a chasm of infinite depth, each one glowing faintly with its own light. Bridges of crystal connected them, and on each platform stood figures cloaked in shadow, their eyes burning like twin lanterns. At the center of it all stood his grandmother. But she wasn't the frail, gentle woman he remembered. Here, she was radiant, cloaked in robes of silver and blue, her presence commanding. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time since entering the city, James felt like he truly understood nothing. "James," she said, her voice reverberating like music. "I knew the city would call you." His lips parted, but no words came. He could only stare. "You thought I was gone," she continued, her expression softening. "But death here is not an end. It is a crossing. I was chosen long ago, as you are now. Erindril does not reveal itself to just anyone. Only those with the spark, the capacity to shape worlds, are summoned. And now, it is your turn." James staggered back, shaking his head. "Shape worlds? I'm nobody. I drive trains. I live in a tiny apartment. I've never." "You underestimate yourself," his grandmother cut in sharply. "The city does not make mistakes. Every traveler who finds their way here is bound to its purpose." The shadowed figures around the platform shifted, their glowing eyes fixed on James. He felt their scrutiny like a weight pressing down on his chest. "What purpose?" James demanded, his voice cracking. His grandmother raised her hand. The constellations above swirled, reforming into a new shape, a door, vast and radiant, stretching across the dome of the sky. Behind it, James glimpsed something terrifying, a storm of black fire, roiling and clawing against the barrier like a living hunger. "The city is not just a sanctuary," she said solemnly. "It is a gate. Beyond it lies the unmaking, a force that devours worlds, realities, everything." Erindril was built as the first defense, and its guardians, she gestured to the cloaked figures, stand watch. But the city cannot endure forever without new blood. It must call those with the spark to take up the mantle. The truth struck James like a thunderbolt. His entire life had been leading to this, his grandmother's stories, his chance discovery of the forgotten station, his choice to board the train. None of it was coincidence. He had been summoned to fight against something older and darker than he could comprehend. But he shook his head, fear rising like bile. "I'm not a hero. I don't belong here." His grandmother's eyes softened again, filled with an almost unbearable love. "Neither did I, James. I was a seamstress when the city called me. Ordinary people are the ones who hold the greatest power because they know what's at stake. That's why you were chosen." The chamber trembled. Cracks of black fire licked against the great star door above, sending ripples of darkness across the constellations. The cloaked figures stirred, their voices rising in unison. a low chant that shook the very air. "There isn't much time," she said urgently. "You must decide now. Take your place among the guardians, or turn away and let the city fall." James's chest heaved. He thought of his quiet life, of the safety of the ordinary world. He could turn back, pretend none of this was real. But then he looked at his grandmother, radiant and resolute, and he thought of the billions of lives that lay beyond that devouring darkness. His choice would not just determine his fate. It would decide the fate of countless worlds. Slowly, James stepped forward. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady. "What must I do?" His grandmother smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "Take my place." She raised her hands, and silver light poured from her body, wrapping around James like molten fire. Pain seared through him, but it was not the pain of injury. It was transformation. Knowledge flooded his mind. How to bend the fabric of reality, how to weave light into weapons, how to anchor worlds against the storm. The spark within him ignited, burning brighter than he thought possible. When the light dimmed, James stood tall, his body wrapped in robes of starlight, his eyes glowing with the fire of constellations. The shadowed figures bowed their heads in acknowledgement. He was one of them now, a guardian. The great door above buckled as the darkness struck again, harder this time. The storm shrieked, a chorus of hunger and rage. James felt its pull, its desire to consume. But he also felt the strength of the city flowing through him, the heartbeat of every guardian who had ever stood in this place. He raised his hand, and starlight blazed. Together with the others, he cast a wall of radiance against the black fire. The chamber shook with the clash, a sound like worlds colliding. For a moment, James thought he would be crushed under the sheer force of it. But he held firm. The darkness recoiled, shrieking, and the door sealed once more. Silence fell. James collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. His grandmother knelt beside him, her hand warm against his shoulder. "You see," she whispered, "you were never ordinary." Tears blurred James's vision. He wanted to speak, to ask if he would ever see the old world again, if he could ever go home. But in his heart, he already knew the answer. His home was here now, with the city that had called him. He looked up at the constellations swirling above, and for the first time in his life, he felt he truly belonged. Sparkles and so, James became a guardian of Arindril, the city between worlds. Not by accident, not by mistake, but by destiny. The ordinary man who once boarded a forgotten train was now a protector of countless realities. And though few in his old world would ever know his story, the stars thems,